Oh no, wait, this is not a card.
Just more of these.
Yeah. I still got some.
Okay. Do you want to keep time? That would be great. I think otherwise.
Wait, give me two more because I still got like this thing. Alright, thanks.
Okay. Oh, for like yesterday.
Just to give people an overview of what we're going to be doing, we're going to send you an intro of the history of CCEN, where it's coming from, and going through the different work streams and what we've been up to with the space affairs, and how we're going to transition. Okay. Oh. Thank you.
So, welcome. This is the official launch of the Citizens Climate Engagement Network. We first presented the governance strategy for this new global institute on October 25th in Minneapolis at the end of a day of dialogues. But I want to tell you a little bit about how this actually got started. So, in Business Climate Lobby, what we do is we sit down with lawmakers and we spend time listening to them. We help them build relationships with the people they've sworn an oath to serve, and try to make the conversation about what the best policy is something that comes from a human place, from what I value, what you value, what the person in a position to make a decision values, and then from there, from that understanding and that human connection, actually build a smarter way of thinking about policy together. In the international policy environment, it's very difficult to create that kind of connection between citizens and the people making decisions. Because big UN conferences have almost 200 countries in them. It's difficult to be accredited to attend, even as an organization. And even then, only the leaders really get to go. So most people never get the opportunity to just walk in and attend and see what's going on. You have to do it remotely. You have to be part of a kind of listening network. So what we decided to do was create the Pathway to Paris project, thinking about the Paris Climate Conference when the world had decided several years ago we were going to decide the world's climate future. And think about how do we open up this global space. And so the idea was create a convening space, create something that's more like a representative government where you can walk into the halls where decisions are made and play a role. And so, in fact, what ends up happening is instead of walking into a space where other people decide, we created a space where citizens actually are the leaders, where citizens actually get to work together and create a different kind of thinking about policy. So that's the Pathway to Paris project. It has a lot of different moving parts, a lot of different elements to it. And the goal was to bring that kind of person-to-person interrelationship into the global negotiating process. The main outcome of that is this, the Citizens Climate Engagement Network. And so what this is the result of a year of working sessions, learning about how you get people in a room together to have conversations about shared values and then translate that on the fly into real, constructive, locally sourced policy advice. And then leave in place, wherever possible, a new network of collaborators. They don't have to be only from Citizens Climate Lobby or only from the local organizations. They can start a new organization. They can be an informal network that springs up on that day. They can do a lot of different things to keep the momentum going and to go deeper and become local leaders in their communities. So we're taking that toolkit and we're introducing it to the world as something where we can actually have people everywhere hosting these meetings, building this network, participating in a global conversation. So I don't want to go on too long about all of this, the history. We'll talk a little bit more about the structure of things later on, but I do want to take a minute to just recognize the people who have helped get us here. A lot of you are actually here in the room, the kind of core team of people who not only are here in Paris, but have been working on this for a while. So everybody who's part of the Pathway to Paris team, stand up. Can someone pan around the room and show them to the people watching online? Incidentally, some people are not standing. So if they're
We
busy
really
doing
appreciate
things on
that
your
people
laptop.
sit down.
What's important about this is that this is effectively a big team meeting that's open. People can come in who are from outside the team. But we're going to formally, essentially, adopt this new governance strategy and begin work as a Citizens Climate Engagement Network today. So I want to thank everybody who's part of this and now start having a conversation about some of the elements of what we've been doing. But before we do that, we're going to talk specifically about the Citizens Voice team in a minute. But I just want to hear from maybe 2 or 3 of you who are part of our team, what you think is sort of the motivation for doing this, what your preferred aims are, what you're getting out of it, what you think we're accomplishing. Who wants to say something? Paul?
So for me, I've been to many of these COPs. I'm Paul Thompson. I'll stand up. And I'm from Minnesota. And I've been to many COP conferences in the past and always left feeling empty, like I didn't know that I really made a difference. I saw a lot of people. I learned a lot myself. And what Citizen Voice and Pathway to Paris and CCL has given me is a platform for really, truly making a difference and communicating to my friends and network back home, what exactly do I do? And that really makes a big difference for me. And I realized in sharing this out with the work of Citizen Voice, the impact I'm having on my friends and family back home, there's going to be a different reception when I go back. And I know that we're going to be filling up spaces because I'm requesting in a strong language that all of us need to step to this next level. I woke up in the this morning, and I just thought, here's another morning to take the next step of moving outside my comfort zone. And I invited a ton of people to this event. And I know I was laying seeds and groundwork, and I don't see any of them in the room, but that doesn't matter. They know that something's going on with the work that we're doing. So I just appreciate being able to play in this environment that you are creating, that we're all creating.
That we're creating together. And actually, I want to say something about what you just said. There's this, we had the conversation in our apartment this morning that there's a kind of pull towards the negotiating venue. It's sort of like the one ring to rule them all. Everybody's so attracted by it and has this kind of strange, glitter in their gaze about I've got to be there. But the thing is that not everybody who just gets inside the venue is going to actually be do something. I think that's what Paul is saying, is that there's so much complexity that it can really push you off your game. It can really push you off track in terms of what your talents are, what you're trying to accomplish. And so part of what we're doing in this room is we're trying to expand the space for people to actually walk into and do something that's more than attend, that it's more than talk. It's actually to build relationships that last over time and then give them a way to be leaders in this whole environment. You can actually lead from outside that venue and influence what goes on inside the venue. But it's harder to do it when you get that glitter in your gaze and you can't really see clearly. You're just being pulled towards the eye, and it doesn't give you back what you think it's supposed to, right? So I think that's a gap we're all trying to fill in, that empowerment gap. Anyone else? Did Paul just say it all?
This is the shy part.
The shy part. People are sure they want to tell their story.
Well, I actually love doing because I love supporting you. And I'm a great guy, but you know, it's a team that gets a lot done. And it's like Paul said, there aren't many things you can do with confinement that actually make a difference. And so supporting the team to make a difference, like,
Thank you. And it's also, you know, when I just had this conversation a minute ago with Claire, somebody comes to me and says, is this happening? Is that happening? We had this thought. And I say, that's great. Is someone doing that? Oh, it's done. This is a very effective group of people, right? Doing things that have already happened that I didn't even know we were doing. And I think that's what this is about, is, you know, local genius, not just local ideas, local insights, local action, local genius. The fact that there's something inherent in being in a place, connecting with people, knowing your life, that you can actually be relevant. Someone just has to say, go and do that. Anyone else? One more?
And my name is Lee Valance. I'm from Berkeley, California. I'm a CCL member. And I found working with my fellow, my community and with political leaders as a citizen to be incredibly rewarding and effective. And I think that if this can be rolled out to other countries so that citizens can find a way to engage with leadership and build relationships, this can be an incredibly profitable and helpful thing.
Excellent. So we're going to have to move on because we have a very tight schedule. We have a couple more people who want to say things, but you're both actually on the agenda. So take a minute during your time to say what this means to you. I'm going to introduce Claire Richet, who's sort of one of the leaders of our Citizens Voice team, to talk a little bit about what Citizens Voice is and why it's part of this whole process.
And Paul and Bill will come with me. So Citizens Voice came out of an initiative, part of the Modern Paris program that Jared created, trying to do a 24/7 news stream of Citizens Voices about climate change during COP21. And so Citizens Voice the goal is to put together all the citizens' voices about climate change during COP21 on one YouTube channel. And so we have this awesome group of volunteers that have really not many people have media backgrounds. We're coming together and just really tackling this project together, and it's been a ton of fun. And it's a really great way for people to, as Paul was saying earlier, to plug into the negotiation process and talk with the people back home, and engage people back home with what they're doing about it. And so that's one really awesome thing. So we have reporters of our own going out and taking coverage of different events and things like that. And then we also have contributing content from like Context News and Climate Countdown and other sources that we're highlighting on our YouTube channel, and then on social media, Facebook and Twitter. And so just talk about one of our own shows that we're doing with Coffee, and we can talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So the story that I can tell that this morning we had a conversation with 4 people from Suriname, and when I went up to this woman yesterday, I felt like a normal person going up to her booth and saying, tell me your story, tell me about Indigenous people in Suriname. But then when Bruce and I took out a video camera and said that we would put this on YouTube for her, I felt like our relationship changed. She knew that we were there as the beginning of the Citizens Climate Engagement Network to give something back, to create a relationship where we were going to say to the world, this is important. So I think that cup of coffee can be a really powerful tool for creating a relationship and engaging these people in a more meaningful way.
And yeah, so many stories about impacting people, impacting me, and we impacting people. Before coming, we went to a gathering at the Minnesota at the state. It wasn't the State Department. It was a gathering at the Science Museum. The Lieutenant Governor was there. Commissioners were there. There are like 80 people from Minnesota that are at this conference, and we started interviewing people from Macalester College. And now we met with them yesterday. They came to Cup of Coffee. Today they're saying, I need a higher resolution picture to send to Macalester College because they want to publish this. And can go on and on and on. But working with Mindy, we've interviewed maybe 10 people. And now we're getting back to them using their network and getting the word out. So it's really quite an amazing thing to use every conversation to expand it beyond that. And now we have cards. So watch out, I've got thousands of cards, so we're going to get the word out fast. Our time's up. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. To me, this is so important that we have people telling the story of what's going on. I had an experience in Lima last year where a journalist who does incredibly good investigative work, who's been writing about politics for many years, was assigned to cover COP20, and we had a mutual friend who connected us, and she said, could you come and teach me about what is actually going on here? Because I've been assigned to do this, but I don't know what the best resource is. And so over 3 days, we spent a total of 6 hours where we talked about what's actually going on and what are the ins and outs and the complexities and what's at stake. And so having people actually coming in and telling that story is tremendously important because NGOs don't have the resources to do it. Their people are overstressed when they're inside. Governments are busy negotiating, and the media don't get to be in every room, and they come in with a huge deficit usually in terms of their knowledge. So it's one of the things that people are able to do to really help create a better flow of information about the reality of all of this. I want to turn things over in a minute to Sarah Beth to talk about what the COP process is. But I wanted to start by introducing a very simple idea. That last night, a lot of us were at the place to be, and we heard Dr. James Hansen speak about the climate problem. And I want to put this in perspective. A lot of people say, why is his voice so strong? What makes him different on this from other scientists? Why is his voice so insistent? Why was he the one who in 1988 testified under oath before Congress that the climate was already changing in a dangerous way? And it's taken all this time for us to catch up to that reality and realize it is changing around us. Dr. Hansen started his career as a scientist looking at Venus. And he saw what a runaway greenhouse effect does in the worst case scenario. Understood that a tipping point is not that one phenomenon, like a single glacier, can't be brought back. A tipping point is everything spirals out of control from then on. And there's nothing anyone can do. And so there's a sense of urgency about all of this. And the COP process comes out of a global recognition of that. It goes back to the 1980s. When scientists and economists and governments came together and created a climate treaty and the process that Sarah Beth is going to explain to us momentarily. So I'll just say that Sarah Beth is part of our global strategy team, works for the UN as well. And when I first met her and was told, she'll help you explain this, I thought, great, because it's difficult to explain. She did it in 5 minutes. more effectively than most people I've seen try to do it. So with that introduction, Sarah.
I heard there was that component, so I'm excited for that. So we're going to put a lot on the sticky notes. But hi, my name's Sarah Beth Broccoli. Thanks for that introduction, Joe. And is that better? So I started actually engaging with the Citizens Climate Engagement Network back in February when Citizens Climate Lobby came to present at my university. And my academic research advisor asked me to present in her place because she wasn't going to be available that day. And that really was my first entry point into what Citizens Climate Lobby is and the narrative that they're trying to produce, which is this very telltale sign of what participatory democracy is supposed to be, citizen engagement and inclusivity in international negotiations where people usually don't have a voice. So appropriately named, Citizens Voice is helping to bring all of those venues and attributes together. And I think that the team that you saw in the room previously when they all stood up was pretty much all of us working collectively, but then also represents internationally over, I want to say 20,000 volunteers in the United States. More? 21, someone else has a better number than I do. But the point is that this is a collective engagement process that does interlink a lot of people from different backgrounds. And you think that that's what the UNFCCC and the COP process is supposed to do. So COP is and anyone's not familiar with it, it doesn't stand for the protection of the police state or something else, but it's committee of the parties, and that is representative of the entire process that Joe was just explaining briefly, which began in 1988. And he kind of stole my introduction, but that's fine. I was going to completely plug James Hansen, because this is usually how I start talking about it, because it's my stepping off point. I was born in 1988, and the reason why this is so important to me is because the IPCC was also started in 1988. And at the same time, James Hansen was the first one to produce a report to the Senate of the United States of America talking about global climate change and global warming as a very realistic threat to humanity and ecological systems that keep our realities in place. So coming forward and moving and ratcheting up that entire process from 1988 to where we stand now in almost 2016, you have to wonder how far we came. So I do want to do something similar that Joe did. Whoever has accreditation to the UNFCCC process, can you stand up, please? Anyone who has a NGO badge, a Secretariat badge, wow, look at all those people. That's amazing. I'm also standing. I work for the Secretariat at the United Nations Division of Sustainable Development. But as you can see, a number of the people in this room are not standing, and I think that's very appropriately timed to tell you about what the UNFCCC process is. And what my experience was from the beginning almost to now is that the way that we are able to engage in an international process is very much represented by what you just saw now. So there's very few people that do actually get accreditation to speak on behalf of their own individual narratives for a process that affects people drastically differently across the board. So, and as you saw who was standing in the room that stood up, we're white, we might be older, we're still not representative of the populations that are the most vulnerable to climate change and that have the most drastic effects from greenhouse gases, from carbon pollution, etc. So as we're going through, there have been about 20 years of committee of the parties processes, developing narratives for adaptation mechanisms for least developed countries, for small island nation states. All of these things are inherent narratives within the COP process. But what we actually can translate that back to our communities is not very telltale. You'll hear a lot of people talk about how the abbreviation system of the United Nations, the APP, the UNFCCC, the ad hoc working group for the Durban platform, all of these things don't make a lot of sense to people like my mom, my friends, and even trying to talk about those things in a very conversational way, people's eyes glaze over, and as they should, it's not approachable. And that's the inherent difficulty in the process. So I know that you are also writing little sticky notes, and I know that I have 10 minutes, so I do want to get to the part of the participatory democracy in essence. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask me, but I do want to plug one specific tool that I found really helpful in my process from student when I first got to go to a COP process in Copenhagen in 2009, so the big failure of what Copenhagen was supposed to be, but also the I guess, the achievement of what the Copenhagen Accord was able to do, pushing people to move forward and make sure that these decisions that international bodies are making get root at the core of people who need to talk about these solutions specifically. I've been before. I was in Warsaw, Peru, which is my favorite country because I was a Peace Corps volunteer there, so it's close to my corazón. And then obviously this year we're all here participating in COP21. So are there any questions from the audience?
Just a quick clarification. Maybe I misunderstood. Is it conference of the parties not voting? Is that what I'm saying?
No, it's conference of the parties. I'm sorry. I get very nervous when I talk to people, so one clarification. Conference of the parties. No, you're completely correct. Conference of the parties.
Did you say you were going to share a tool?
Yeah, so we look at this online. This is posted into our Slack feed as well, but this is a timeline narrative of what the UNF process is. And you can go online, it's www.unfccc.org/timeline, and it gives you a pictorial guideline of everything that has happened since 1988 when James Hansen presented before Congress and the United States and when the IPCC was formed, all the way up to now in Paris. And it's a nice little background. It tells you the decisions that were made going forward, the main players, and the pros and cons of each one. So, highly recommended. That's where I got my start as a student, and it's where I constantly do research at this level now, the Division for Sustainable Development. I always go back to this. Question?
And it's posted on the Slack feed.
It's also posted in the Slack feed.
In what category?
Paris team.
Just for, so the web address I think is it's unfccc.int
Yes.
/timeline.
Also tweeted it.
Cool. So that's why I was at COP this morning as well, and the negotiations, at least for member states, are inherently incredibly boring because the draft text takes a long time to go through. And a really funny attribute, but probably not funny, that I was told to me, a reporter figured out how quickly all member states would have to go through the draft text, which is about between 20 to 30 pages. And they need to move at an incremental pace of 1.5 minutes per line in order to get to the draft text to present to Francois Hollande next Saturday. That's probably not going to happen. Other questions? Clarification?
So when I've been to these conferences before, like when I talked to Bill McKibben at my first conference, he said, well, you come early, but nothing really happens until the last day or the last 2 days, and then they have the extension. You know, how is that embedded kind of in the way they do things to run out of time? I mean, it's very human nature to barely get done in time or not at all. And I'm wondering if you have any insights on that from the inside.
Yeah, also actually my boss, the director for sustainable development for ocean SIDS and climate and transport, said something also very important to me. He said that people really don't want to work until they absolutely have to. And it's like this idea of irreducible complexity, that the problem isn't really a problem until, you know, the night before your term paper is due. You're like, wow, I should have worked on this more, or if I only had more time to figure this out, then it would be perfect. And I think something that's what we all need to appreciate about this process is that a degree of however it is the outcome, it doesn't need to be perfect, but we are out of time. So it's two very specific ideologies that run against each other and conflict, because we actually do need it to be perfect, don't we? We can't have, 1.5 is the livable amount of most nation states worldwide to be able to deal with the adaptation and mitigation effects of climate change. So we're supposed to mitigate what we can and adapt to what we can. But what about all those other nation states that can't adapt? What are they supposed to do? And is their time running out because some people can't really figure out what the process should be in a timely manner? But yeah, always at the end there's a massive rush.
Even having a mistake from early helps with that, or I think some people be like, why does the mistake come early? It's not going to do anything. So the more effective mistake next
Right at the end. And from a youth standpoint, I've always had that criticism because it's always the first 2 days there's political pandering. There's this idea that all of the important people need to come to kick off the COP, to pass the gavel to the next COP president. to do this massive show of what international political will looks like, but then it's deeply drops off. And you'll see heads of states and also like high political actors, prime ministers, come to do the rest of the work that presidents or other important political figures won't be playing that role, but they still lack the steam and the aggression that needs to take place at these international negotiations levels. So I think that criticism is a very appropriate one, because you think that people would get more done if at the ending that's when political leaders are there. But my question is, if this is one of the most important defining moments of our time, why aren't they there for the full 2 years?
So I just wanted to say, did anyone write down questions on sticky notes, or are we just gonna just have an open conversation? But
I have them all in my hands right now. Virtual sticky notes.
So George, you had a question. Do you want to ask it now?
Yeah, I can. I want to write it down. I'm thinking of, but I have it here. So, my name is Jonas Mlađe. I'm from 1 degree Serbia, from Belgrade, Serbia, and a couple of maybe years ago, I learned how CCL is doing stuff with this all direct communication with decision makers and lobbying directly with representatives. And I really thought that such a thing can also be transferred to Europe. And I was really excited about the way of how you are doing things. But when I proposed similar events, like conference in Senate, or what is the name, I don't know exactly, to my European colleagues, they told, okay, look, this is not USA. In Europe, things are quite different, and our representatives are not, how to say, so attached to constituencies like Americans. So CCEN is, your goal is to go global. How you will, for example, solve or install network in Europe when people believe that they are disconnected from their representatives. I know that American democracy is not perfect, but this looks like you will.
So let me just steal that, and then I want to pass it over to someone who can comment on the European context. But this is something that I discovered working with local groups in different places. Like, so you're coming from Serbia. We also have volunteers in Nepal, Bangladesh. We have people who are working to start groups in Panama and Peru. And there are places where access to decision makers is not necessarily going to work in the same way. In some places in Nepal, we found that our local volunteers are actually the only policy infrastructure that exists. Yeah. There is no local government. There's no local official representing the national government. The national government just makes sure that there's nothing bad going on and then kind of stays away until there is. And so while that infrastructure is getting built, there's actually a tremendous role for people to play just developing the civic infrastructure that they need. There are a lot of ways in which these local conversations, like the one we're having now, can actually turn into ongoing engagement. And one of them is to actually pull decision makers into that room. Maybe instead of visiting them, sometimes it's that they come to you and they start to realize there's benefit in that interrelationship. And the fact that some people don't do it that way doesn't mean that it can't be done, right? And I think that's why you're here. But if permit me, I wanted to ask Jerome to say just a word or two about the experience that CCL is having in Germany, because some of our groups in Europe have said this, that they're told by political parties, well, we don't really interact with constituents in that way. But I know that CCL Germany has been having a lot of meetings, and it'd be interesting to hear just a few words about what that feels like.
Yeah, so we were working in Germany now for 2 years. We started by a volunteer, CCL volunteer, German CCL volunteer was in Washington there, got to know you guys, and then came back with this idea to do this in Germany. And me and I, him and I, we met already. We had coal plants And then immediately got me and I said, this is what we need. And then since then, now we're 16 now, which is little if you count the numbers compared also, especially to the US. But us 16, we had already now more than 20 meetings with members of the Bundestag. Just now we've been invited to speak before, just Monday was very good news, invited to speak before some members of a sustainability group in one of the major parties. So they're really listening to us, and they really care what we're doing. They're just suppressed already. That when we tell them, well, no, I'm not working for an NGO. I'm not even a climate scientist. We have some who have lawyers there. We have engineers. We have, I think somebody works in a store. And just when we come there and tell them, no, actually I don't do anything like that. And that's the moment when the attention is there. When they start taking notes, why are you here? Well, we're here because it concerns us. We're citizens who want to use our democratic powers if we want, and they say, yeah, great, that's what we need. We need this. We need to see that the population is looking at what we're doing, and we need to see that people like you exist, because otherwise, how can we fight for laws, so for example, tax carbon? So yeah.
Thank you, Jerome. I know you guys have talked to each other before on calls, and maybe Georgie set this whole thing up so that's happening. We have about 2 more minutes in this Q&A section. I just want to give it back to Sarah Beth and actually ask you a question myself. That as someone who sits in the negotiations, right, you sit there and you write reports on what's happening this minute, what the meaning of it is in relation to your division, the UN, and then you also provide insight to all of us. What is it that you feel being in that position, which I think is sometimes a very isolated position, you can get from having all kinds of people on your team doing things in relation to your efforts, sharing information with you, sharing your information with others? What does that do for you?
I mean, it makes my soul sing, because I've got a very internal mechanism for what that does. But I mean, yeah, working in the secretariat can kind of be a lonely life, right? Because you write reports to people you don't really ever see, and it's supposed to be helping them guide their decision-making process at that level. So where you can't really effectually change, you're writing a report that might be able to encourage someone else to effectuate change, but it's really a lockstep process. And I'm really new to the UNFCCC. I just started working at the Secretariat in New York City in February, and I'm the lowest in our office. But I'm still there, and I think that that's important to play this idea of showing up into a legal process, into an international mandate that has the ability to make change, but then to also make sure that you're incorporating this idea of what a citizen's voice is. But in its purest form, it's really what you bring to that process as well. So if I'm writing a report, I'll try to inject narratives of civil rights, of human rights, and usually that will make it to the top. But these individual conversations that we have with each other, no matter if you're a scientist, if you're a political activist, if you're an artist, if you are a student, if you are an expert, all of those voices come down into one filtered drop. And that's how we interact with the process. And showing up is incredibly important. So this idea that people get ambivalent to the process, or they don't think that anything's going to happen because they, as an individual person, can't do it. We all know the famous narrative that one person can change the world through small steps, and every single one of our collective actions is a small step. And that's why I stay engaged with the process. That's why I try to be a double agent on both sides for the betterment of what I see to be my world and my future, but also everyone that's standing in solidarity shoulder to shoulder with me. And I guess I'll leave it on one specific point that I spoke about at Lehigh University last year when I was still a student, is this idea that all of these costs are very important. And in Copenhagen, there was the largest outpouring of civil society that had accreditation of the process and showed up. It was reminiscent of the 1960s. You had massive political protests. You had people who were organized and that were able to not just pressure local readers, but pressure readers internationally. That number significantly decreased in each subsequent COP afterwards. So you're talking about a number of 30,000 participants down to 10 at each subsequent COP. And that's a very telling number. 20,000 voices lost that have accreditation to the process, not counting the people who don't have accreditation that weren't able to show up and participate. And that's very meaningful. Now, this particular process, I can't remember what the numbers are, but there's something like 3,000 journalists and media teams, which is more than has been accepted in the past. They're bringing that back up again, but your ability to act and your ability to be engaged is always under fire, it's always under question if you let someone take your voice away. So standing here, we all have a collective voice, we should use it, and to know that each one of those little voices is very powerful. Hi. No, clearly. Yeah, amazing. But Naomi Klein last night said you can't offset your activism, and that's what I want to leave you with. So your activism doesn't need to be world. Sure. No, you can't offset your activism. So whether that's someone in the street making a human chain, or you're actively engaging with a leader that you just had coffee with, and you're trying to talk to them about CCL, those movements are important, and I encourage you all to stay engaged and stay curious.
Thank you so much. I was actually at one of the activists at Copenhagen, and it was a massive and amazing thing. But one of the things about it was that there was a huge clashes with the police. And I was actually quite frightened about that going into South America, the next one actually. And I think in some ways that's not the way to do it, and especially here. But actually those clashes with the police were the one thing that everyone was talking to me when we got back. Oh, we saw you, we saw this and that. So, actually I didn't agree with that last night. I'm sorry, I got everything else said, it was fantastic. But at the moment we have to offset our activism. It's all we can do. We have to offset it because nobody can march in Paris and nobody can do anything in Paris. So we have to do small things and clever things, intelligent things and artistic things here. And I think we need to be asking people to do everything all day, not just on the 29th, every day. Let's see everyone out all around the world and they are marching for us. So in actual fact, I didn't agree with her on that one point.
Well, I think that point.
That's just me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think her point maybe was taken out of context because she wasn't just talking about just the marching part. And I think what I said, maybe I'll clarify again, is that your activism isn't just being in the streets with signs, isn't just being. Your activism is everything that you're doing right now. So the people that are engaging and writing letters to their editors, people that are writing blogs on The Guardian, people that are showing up and having conversations with leaders that can do something, you're also doing something. That is your activism. And your activism doesn't need to be a human chain, but it's very lucrative when it is. But that human chain doesn't need to be a very concrete idea of what we think it is. We can think a little bit broader about what that human chain might look like.
Thank you. So I wanted to point out that you might have noticed that Sarah has a pin on her lapel, and I have one on mine. These are different SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So I happen to have the one on my lapel that's about peace, justice, and strong institutions. And so I just want to say something about that right now, because one of the things that Peter Bukowski said this morning in the Healthy Climate Project launch was that we don't want more serious. Right? One of the reasons we want to solve this problem is because this problem is about degradation. It's not just the degradation of the atmosphere, the degradation of the Earth's life support system. It's the degradation of everything that makes our planet habitable for human civilization. We've built our whole civilization around a climate that's not working. And so peace, justice, and strong institutions is a very big part of the climate solutions business. And one of the strong institutions that's missing is a way for people around the world to engage in global politics. So that's why we're doing this. That's why we're trying to create this convenient space for people to actually have a voice, not just that says, we demand you do this, we hope you do this, but that actually plays a role in changing the thinking in the room, whether people can be there or not. So I want to say a few words about our governance strategy. We introduced this document that came from a year of meetings and assessing what allows people to interact constructively and thinking, how do you carry those voices into a process that doesn't really make room for them at the moment. We presented it as something that should be commented on and criticized and altered, and received virtually no criticism. From people high up in the UN to people in the NGO community to individual citizens who never thought about this before, people looked at the structure and said, we love this. This is a really good way to do it. So I'm just going to tell you some of what's in that governance structure because it becomes official today. The Citizens Climate Engagement Network is not an NGO. It's not an organization as such. It's a methodology. It's a way of interacting with people. But it's going to have a structure. So there's an advisory coalition of nonprofit leadership and partners in UN agencies. There's a secretariat for implementation. So the difference between those two is that you can have representation from a number of different types of stakeholders in the UN system and outside the UN system who advise on how things should go and try to make sure that you stay on track and get things right and adopt best practices. But you need people who actually do the work, steering everything. So that's the secretariat that puts into motion this whole thing. And then a global team structure. Global team structure is sort of similar to how citizens climate lobby works, right? You have local groups and networks, and you have people who are tasked with trying to coordinate a little more broadly, and then you have the overall global team. And all of that structure works underneath the secretariat that's trying to guide you to make sure you're getting it right, and this advisory coalition that's giving you ways to bring these ideas into the places where decisions get made, right? So the idea is, if you look at this logo, right, the reason that this is the logo of the Citizens Climate Engagement Network is not just a nice thing to look at. Partly it's a reference to amity and spirituality because the idea for this network actually came up during their top 20 in Lima. But it's also a reference to circles of access to the UN process. Right? There's an inner circle, then there's a little bit more inclusive, a little bit more than that, and then the media who almost never get to be in the room. Then outside, there's a whole world. And if you look at the top of this logo, you can see that actually the circles are open, and they're open to the whole world. And so the principle of what we're trying to do with this governing structure is to make sure that even though we can't take people from every community in the world and put them in the room where the decision is made, even though we can't reasonably expect the co-chairs running this process to say, could 7 billion people please vote in a consensus fashion, right? What we can do is we can make sure that the best ideas from those people, and some of those people as well, do get to be there, and do get to be heard, and do get to change the way the thinking goes. So that this global team structure, aligned with the Secretariat for Implementation, and then this advisory coalition, is actually a network of people from all levels, from all walks of life, from all backgrounds, from all countries. The toolkit for running local meetings is the way we deploy this strategy. It's a very simple document. It can be easily translated into any language, and it just gives people a sense of how do you run the room, and what do you bring out of that room so that it becomes part of this network. I want to say a few words about some founding partners, because that advisory coalition is very important. It's going to create the core of how we get this to people around the world. And the first UN partner to sign on is UNICEF. UNICEF is in pretty much every country in the world, has 15,000 staff members, and they're working on behalf of the world's children. And their partnerships director, Olaf Shervin, said, this is such an important issue, and without solving this issue, we cannot do good work on behalf of the world's children. And people who are outside of this process need to have a voice. It is not ethical to exclude their voices. So in support of that notion, UNICEF will be represented in the advisory coalition, and from there we will start building in more partners over the next year. Obviously, Citizens Climate Lobby is part of this advisory coalition. So is the International Association for the Advancement of Innovative Approaches to Global Challenges, and the Global Challenges Foundation that's associated with that. The Healthy Climate Project, Cool Planet Minnesota, So we have already a number of nonprofit partners that have signed up. We have a number of other UN venues that are also kind of in talks that could be supporting this. And that's what will help us get everybody's voices to everyone who's making decisions. So I won't go on about that, but between this session and the next that I'm just going to open right now about our work streams, let's do the sticky notes thing, because we want to have a conversation about some of the complexities of this after we talk about a couple of the work streams. And it would be useful, I think, if things that come to your mind in the moment come back in that discussion later. So if you have a chance, just jot down things that are coming to mind, questions, doubts, ideas. And then in the open discussion, we'll first start off with the questions that are on those notes. So in the last year, we had these working sessions where people kind of come together and converse about their values, right? Why am I here? What is it in the world that I want to protect? Why does this matter to me? Not, I love humanity. We all love humanity, right? It's a very big thing. It's very important. But actually something much more personal, something much more local, much more in your experience. And as people talk about those things, what you get is interesting alliances. So you'll have a room full of people where, you've got 3 people who they just want to talk about carbon pricing. You got 3 other people who want to talk about water scarcity. You've got 3 other people who want to talk about peace and security. And they're all there to meet each other. And it ends up that none of those groups of 3 stay intact. Because it turns out that someone discovers actually the affinity that I have with you has to do with your schools. The affinity I have to do with this other person is about agriculture. I didn't even know I was going to talk about that. And so people get into those groups based on their actual personal affinities, not their issue area or their expertise. And then from those conversations, we can report from the room. So we had a room full of people who thought they were going to talk about, carbon pricing, clean energy, water scarcity, and, the global goal, the long-term goal. But actually the report from the room includes none of those topics, not as top-line items. They become subtopics because the affinities in the room were for other things, right? Now, out of all of those sessions, what we learned was there are certain common themes, and we should treat those themes as the priorities as we go forward. And what we can do is we can build teams, not in one place, but in a lot of different places, teams of people that work together on that issue regularly. And then help to learn new things, fill in gaps in the overall discussion, do research together, essentially do that grunt work of making everybody smarter that people forget to do, which is what leads to things falling through the cracks. So the first work stream that got started was the carbon pricing work stream. We'll hear a little more about that in a minute, but I want to just run through the list that we now have. We started with the carbon pricing work stream because Citizens Climate Lobby is full of people who think about policy and the implementation of policy. And none of them have ever done it at all. They only do things like get climate change into the curriculum and do some job training for people who want to install solar panels. That's kind of the deployment of solutions, but they don't actually involve the public in the design of the solution. It's very token where it happens, and in the world of democracies, it's often, well, you can vote, so we're covered. So we have a participation worksheet to make sure that the things we're doing in this network actually translate into implementation of Article 6, real public participation in the global process. We have a work stream on the Sustainable Development Goals. We'll hear about that in a minute as well. A work stream on oceans, human health, and then we've now started a long-term goals work stream that the Healthy Climate Project is helping with. And I want to announce today that we have another one. We've been working for some time with an organization called Read and Note. It's a private company that designs software that allows you to interact with electronic text. And we had this idea, wouldn't it be cool if you could take the negotiating text, put it into the Read and Note system, and have people all over the world get in there and comment on it, and create discussion threads and host meetings inside the document. Their technology facilitates that. We've been trying to figure out the best way to deploy that technology. We don't have the ability to pay for it. And it turns out that there are people in the UN system who don't have the money either. But they might once they see what it can do. And so we've been given access to this technology, at least temporarily during the COP21. And what we're going to do is, starting tomorrow, we're going to put the most recent negotiating text, the one proposed on Sunday, as well as the Geneva negotiating text, the actual legal document that's still in place, into the Read and Note system, and invite people to join it and to collaborate, to comment on the text. So we're starting a text tracking work stream where people all over the world can actually get in there and try to make it into an informational resource that people can, inside of negotiations, can benefit from. And if you think about what that means, a lot of times when we've talked about this project, someone says, well, why would a negotiator who knows everything ever look at that? And the reason is they don't know everything. They know almost nothing about what's in the minds of the other negotiators, because in a lot of ways it's a competition. The way that you have advantage in that competition is by not sharing all of your thinking. And so if it turns out that a number of the negotiating teams start paying attention to this process and they say, wow, I can get insight from hundreds of people and then thousands of people. And it turns out that since last night, when that change was made in the text, people just went in and solved a bunch of problems that were created by the new language. So we're going to read that and bring it into the negotiations the next morning. If you're one of the teams that thinks that you know everything and doesn't need to do that, and you're just going to say your piece and leave the room, you now have a real problem. You will be behind the curve if you don't look at that. And so without having to get permission from anyone, you've now opened up the room. And you've given people access directly to the thinking of the negotiators. That's the hope. So that's what the text tracking workstream will work on.
I have a question about that.
Yeah, sure.
It sounds really exciting, but I see two issues that I don't quite understand. First of all, how is this technology different from other technologies that are out there that allow people to collaborate? And secondly, how would you get over a potential challenge of having the authorities, these, so to speak, allow that to happen between negotiators?
So the first thing is that it's different because it creates an actual, what's that? Okay, I'm sorry. So there were two questions. The first question was, what makes this different from other platforms? And the second is, how do you get around the problem of people authorizing this to happen between negotiators? The first answer is that it's different because this platform allows you to kind of instantly create a new Facebook-style timeline of a discussion thread that's directly linked into an actual electronic book, right? And so the book becomes an anchor for this community. The second is that you can also, in fact, host live video conferences inside the text. You can go in, click on a little post-it, and it opens up a live video conference that's happening right then. So you can set things up and inform the people who are on the scene the morning that they're going to go into the negotiation. The second thing is that you don't need anyone's authorization. The documents are public. It's just that it's very difficult to actually create a community of insight around the document because they publish a Word document or a PDF, and it's not interactive at all. And the people that are going to make decisions about it have absolutely no contact with the outside world. A lot of people who are inside the negotiations don't even know who they are on certain teams. It takes time to catch up with that detail. So that's the other thing. It's just about them recognizing that this will make them smarter. So we're about 5 minutes behind. I just want to make that note for our team. And I want to introduce Peter Joseph, who's going to talk about the carbon pricing workstream. The carbon pricing workstream has been working since about April, and he's going to tell you what they've been doing, and it has created a new possibility for how we interact locally with the negotiating process.
everybody. My name is Peter Joseph. I'm a retired emergency physician, San Francisco, California, Citizens Climate Lobby. Been working on this carbon pricing work stream for several months. And let me just tell you the background. As an emergency physician, working at a trauma center, I've come to understand very clearly that the more complex the issue, and this is a very complex issue, sometimes the simpler the solutions. The simpler the solutions. And that's how we function in the emergency room. That's how we're trying to function right here. So we have this big problem. We're at the bottom of the ninth. The bases are loaded. It's a full count, and maybe just one more pitch in this game before it's game over. And as Dr. Hansen pointed out yesterday, we have to get the right solution applied in the right way, and that is to get the world economy, the one thing that will do this for us. We have to get it right. We have to get it straight. And in the current way that the United Nations has been proceeding after what? This is the 21st meeting. There's very little enforcement. We have intentions, promises from many nations to do something that we know won't add up to a solution. And therefore, the solution has to be one really solve this problem, and that is to get the money right. And Citizens Climate Lobby is pushing for a carbon fee dividend with border duties. And it's the border duty that is the enforcement mechanism, not the UN. UN doesn't have an army. It's the border duty that turns the wheels of the world energy economy around to a clean energy economy. Because if you want to do business with the largest economy, the US, we're going to impose a border duty if you don't have a carbon tax. And if just the United States makes a deal with China, makes a deal with the EU, we're going to get somewhere. We are going to get somewhere. So we first started looking at the text, and we found the text inadequate. It's a lot of carbon trading. We know that there's a lot of money being made in trading. That money does nothing to help the problem. So we're trying to get language in for carbon pricing through a tax, taxation or fee. That doesn't seem to be happening. So we're back to principles, and that's the ECP. There's going to be some handouts. The three principles are that whatever is agreed to must be effective, it must be efficient, and it must be. If you actually drill down, you come to a carbon tax, because cap and trade is not effective, cap and trade is not efficient, and cap and trade is not equitable. A carbon tax with the funds recycled back into the economy in any way that the country wishes to. They might build hospitals and schools, they might put money in people's pockets. That meets the E3CP principles. Even the Pope has criticized carbon trading. Hansen has pointed out that you can't solve this problem with individual country promises. Because if Canada or Germany or the United States lowers their consumption of fossil fuels, what does that do to the price? It lowers the price, someone else is going to gobble them up. It's a world problem that requires a global solution, and that global solution imposed by the United Nations. The only entity that can impose the global solution is the global economy itself. That's why the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition announcement on Monday was such a boost. We were so happy to see that. That's the mechanism that's going to work with the UN mechanism coming in at an angle to help the United Nations mechanisms, which are sort of in a straitjacket. They can only do so much. It's going to help these countries actually meet their targets, their individual targets, through a reasonable mechanism, which is carbon pricing itself. And if they follow the principles of efficient, effective, and equitable, they may actually, by 2020, get something effective. So I hope you'll all look at the Citizens Climate Lobby .org website. And for further explanation, I have written 2 proposals to the MIT Climate Collab Contest for a US carbon price. That has one the Popular Choice Award 2 years in a row. It's called, if you Google, The Little Engine That Could, and add MIT, so you don't get the children's story. The Little Engine That Could plus MIT, both this year and last year, you'll see an explanation of how carbon being dividend can work. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Peter. That was incredibly important information. I just Peter mentioned, we've been talking about this a lot in this group this week, and I think it just bears repeating again and again. A few weeks ago, it was said that carbon pricing was off the table. All right, and I've been hearing some people actually venue itself say something very interesting about that, which is that you've got to think about what that table is made of. If you think it's that may be true, but it's not only true. It's made of the agreement and the decisions related to it. It's made of the national plans for climate action, the INDCs. It's made of financing, whatever that is, and we hope it's going to be the re-engineering of the global financial system so that it no longer harms the climate. And fourth, it's made of action platforms for implementation. And when the Carbon Pricing Leadership Coalition launched, with a similar structure to this, where you've got governments, intergovernmental agencies, businesses, and NGOs all at the same table as here, making policy, starting Monday, this past Monday. You now have a huge breakthrough in global policy making, and you have an action platform by 2020. So it's a big breakthrough. Things are happening that are actually much more positive than what you're hearing in the general media. And it's important that we understand, what is that table made of? What are we really working on? Okay, so we're now 8 minutes behind. But as long as we all know that, we'll be okay. We're going to ask Sarah Beth again and the interns team that are all working on the Sustainable Development Goals to tell us a little bit about why do we have a work stream that's focused on linkages between the Sustainable Development Goals and the climate problem. We've got about 10 minutes for that segment. So, Sarah, would you like to come up and take over?
Hello, everyone again. Yeah, come over here. So, one of the cool parts about being engaged with the Global Strategy Program with Pathway Paris it's really amazing. You're working through the same. So, come up, and Claire, the director of Citizens Voice, Isha Peace. And then there are
technical note. Leaving technology on these chairs causes them to slide off back.
Oh dear, that was.
But no harm done.
Right.
It's okay.
Apple drops units of really tall buildings, and they're supposed to withstand fall. So let's see if it actually works, because that was my computer. Hopefully it's okay. But yeah, so everyone that you see up here has collectively worked on a different part of the project that they found kind of their home within. So I do want to introduce what the SDGs are, but then additionally let the interns talk about what the program is, because I think it's almost a disadvantage to say that someone's an intern when they give blood, sweat, and tears into a program, and they're integral parts of what the entire process is supposed to be. As I actually heard from Claire before, she's a mastermind behind why Citizens Climate Voice was so important to this project. And the same thing goes with every other one that will do much better job of introducing themselves than I am. But I'm going to start off, Martin.
Yeah, so my name is Martin Cronin. I'm from Dublin in Ireland. And originally I was working on the Sustainable Development Goals work stream. And I did some outreach projects in Trinity College Dublin, where we were asking people, how did climate change affect the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals? So we got quite a good response in college from that. And then I also did a bit of work on the carbon work stream with John Hanson.
All right, so I'm Zach Bodwin. I also work with Morgan Wood. We work in the student assembly together for student loans, so that's what we started. I work with the SDGs, and so our biggest focus is on partnership, number 17, because we feel as if you can't really have effective change unless you have people coming together. of NGOs or governments and citizens. So we've been going through and trying to figure out how to effectively get different pockets of people and groups to work on them together, and then exploring how they interact with each other, because they're all pretty inclusive.
Where are you from?
New York State, in the States.
No, the only thing is that we have a really unique niche where we're in a system of 64 campuses, and so we've had a lot of different people being able to talk and understand what the SDGs are, and we're hoping to talk to other systems. We reached out to California, and so we're hoping to start like a butterfly effect and have other people also understanding SDGs, because it's all encompassing, from eradicating poverty to ending climate change. It all plays into each other. So I think that's a really unique way that SDGs can be approached.
I just want to say it's really also unique because SUNY where they have government, partnerships and stuff, and we have professors who have gone everywhere. And so by SUNY aligning with that, we are reaching out to a lot of different groups, a lot of different places, and like Mexico, we have someone going to Mexico to do sustainable forestry, part of SDG 15. So it's all together.
I'm going to rep the two that are not here because there are two interns that are also currently in the COP delegation with Moravian College, and those two students were able to gain accreditation through an institution outside of CCL, but they were also individually working on the framework and the voice behind SDGs at their university, and they put on a number of political engagements that talk to students about what's your SDG, what are the interlinkages between something like Goal 6, which is water and sanitation, and Goal 5, which is the gender goal, and what that might mean for climate change impacts for women specifically abroad. So there's a number of interlinkages that we plug here at the United Nations, because I'm sure that you heard the criticism from The Economist saying that the stupid development agenda is something that's not necessarily obtainable or relatable to, but when you transition from something where the MDGs only had 8 goals, Millennial Development Goals, that ended in 2015, and now we're transitioning to the next Save the World platform that the UN is putting forward. In the next 15 years, these Sustainable Development Goals, they are now at an aggregation of 17 goals with 169 individual indicators. So that's a lot of disaggregated data that the UN is transitioning towards, but that's something that each one of these people individually has worked on in some capacity.
My name is Isate Centralina. I'm from Puerto Rico. I'm currently in New Jersey studying my PhD. I'm a study chemistry, so I'm kind of like a scientist, but I'm also working with community empowerment. So I started working with the SDGs, and the way that I use them is to bring people, like common people, to the room to talk about climate change and how this relates to their daily life and their priorities, because people all over Latin America and Caribbean have other priorities that, yes, climate change intersects with them, but sometimes they are worried about what am I going to put in the table for my kids, and it's like a tool to get them together. But I'm also working with creating partnerships with organizations to come and participate of the CCEN, so the Citizens Climate Engagement Network, so to get that voice of the Latino people across the whole Central, South, and Caribbean into this program. Because as we were talking about in Citizens Voice today, Indigenous people want to be part of the table, as other people should be too. And like, we cannot have a table of 7 billion people, but we can try to give them more access to the process. So I'm working with getting that, like my community, into the process.
Hi, my name is Claire Shea, and I'm originally from Minnesota. I graduated from Boston University and now live in DC. And I'm running Citizens Voice. So.
Just running Citizens Voice. So yeah. I think that really a round of applause for everyone that's up here. Woo! When you are working in a team objective, it's really important to be surrounded by really smart people. And I think that collectively we form a team in so much as it's not necessarily one person directing the other, but how we all are able to adapt to each other and do our own projects while simultaneously making sure that this one joint effort for CCEN is one that is meaningful from our standpoint as youth, and then talking intergenerationally for what this entire project is. Because if you look around the room, there's a huge disparity of ages, but at least at the Sustainable Development Goals in their core, this is something that's very important. It's this intergenerational quality that really makes a agenda achievable when people from different walks of life work together at different ages. So if I can leave you with the Sustainable Development Agenda of what it's supposed to be, it's disaggregated, it's supposed to be more inclusive, and it wasn't just for white men in the UN making a decision in the basement about the Millennial Development Goals, and then someone walking down the hallway saying, oh, you should include environment. And he's like, yeah, okay, I'll do that. And then that was the Millennial Development Agenda. This was, the Sustainable Development Goals were painstakingly decided. And I remember being in the room over the weekend when all member states finally decided to adopt the agenda in September. And it's really because a number of collective people were pushing for their own individual goals in the same way you see these people up here pushing for projects that are close to their communities. So.
Could we hear your ages?
Oh boy.
I'm 22.
25. 27.
19.
22.
24.
Give it back to Joe.
So the world is in good hands. Yes. Young people doing things to make a better future. I want to say something about that point that Sarah Beth mentioned, that there's a critique from some people that the Sustainable Development Goals are too complex. There are too many targets. It's trying to do everything at once. But consider that the Sustainable Development Goals agenda, which is the global development agenda through the United Nations for all countries from 2015 to 2030, applies to all people in all countries. So the idea that we wouldn't all together try to get everything right is kind of strange. And I think that, that's the kind of optimistic thinking that has brought us all here together. And I think it's a lot more logical. It's a lot more logical when you think about what the United Nations is supposed to be, which is a way to make sure that there's peaceful, inclusive prosperity around the world, not global conflict at all times, that in its 70th General Assembly, 70 years, the formal agenda was adopted to try to get everything right. Officially, for the first time, all the nations of the world decided, let's work together to get everything right from now on. And so that's a really, I think, important moment, and it's an important step forward, and it's a turning point. And I'm going to ask you about oceans, because we have an oceans work stream, and it's important to think about, you might live on land. There's a lot going on under the water, and what does that actually mean in relation to the way that we live, in relation to getting this whole thing right? So, Jerome.
Okay, so who was surprised when suddenly Joe comes up with ocean, climate change? Heads up. See, there are some, less than I thought. I think it's the same like the negotiators not long ago, or maybe still some are feeling it. What does this have to do with our topic, climate change? And this is really the first time this COP, oceans are really part of the big pictures, that there's a spotlight there, which is sad, but just follows a long trend. It's the same with science and politics. I don't know about the US, but in Germany, for example, environmental laws on the Earth Sea, on the North Sea, in the Baltic Sea, they're 20 years behind compared to the terrestrial environmental laws. And it's always the same. It's just in science, in policy making, it's always forgotten somehow, which is I saw scientists today saying this is because it's far away. Not everybody lives on the coast. You can't really see inside. You can only see what I've been now for 50 years. So it's far away in our mind, but actually it influences us a lot. Just talking about climate change, when you hear that half of the world's, or some scientists say more half the world oxygen comes out of the sea, and that 60% of CO2 that we produce is not going to plants or into the atmosphere. 60% of that goes into the sea, so it takes up a lot of what we do wrong, and even more, it takes up the heat, the extra heat that is generated so far mostly has gone into the oceans. So without the oceans, there would have been much more heat here. We couldn't even live anyways, but people tend to forget that or don't even know it. So this shows that oceans are in fact very, very important part of the system, of the climate system itself. So we have to take this much more account. Also because, not just because of that, because of that we get our oxygen from there, but also small island states are a real threat to disappear. Depending on if we have an outcome or not here, then in 20 years, a lot of the states will not exist anymore. I have there statement from one of the major coral reef scientists association, where all of the scientists signed that if we don't do something now, in 20 years, coral reefs are a thing of the past. We will not be able to see them anymore. And it's not just because it's a nice scuba dive. There are 400 million fishers live just on coral reef alone. 1.2 billion people are directly dependent, either because their father is a fisherman, because they're selfish, or because the reef protects them from storm, are directly dependent their survival on the reefs. Also, the fisheries are under threat by itself already, that we fish too much, but also because of climate change, everything changes. So also the fish stocks, and there's ocean acidification. That is something that happens. It's not the warming itself. It's not really the climate warming. But it comes also from the CO2 that goes into the water, makes it more acidic, and makes it much harder for a long range of organisms to live. So it's really time that we put a spotlight to the oceans. And that's why I'm glad that tomorrow is also the Ocean Day at the COP, where we can learn a lot about what is happening there. But we will not just hear what is so bad about that, but surely also that a lot of the solutions lie in the ocean also, because it's such an integral part of our climate system, and what happens with the heat, what happens with other negative ecological influences are offered by the ocean. That's why we can also use the ocean to make it better. So I want to bring a glimmer of hope here. I want to make you understand how important it is, but also how important it is that we know what happens there, but also how important it is that we turn there for solutions, because there's a lot to do there. I could go on now, but you will see probably tomorrow a lot of this there. That's the one thing. Inform yourself about that. The other thing is, what for me is one of the most important things, and this is why I think I became a marine biologist, is because I love the ocean. I love to see it, I love to be inside it, and I love to share my love for it. So do the same. Go diving, go boating, go fishing, go on the beach, and bring other people and explain them. That will be, I think, the biggest thing to do for the oceans. Thank you.
Thank you.
One second. We're going to do one more thing before questions. And then, so thank you, Jerome. But we're going to have the people who've spoken be able to answer questions. If you're jotting down your ideas and concerns on stickies, we'll collect those in a minute. But first, I want to just introduce, for those of you who didn't see this morning's presentation, Peter Gutowski, to talk about the Healthy Climate Project and the Healthy Climate Workstream, and why this is part of this kind of project of citizen-led monitoring and policy development.
Great, thank you. So the whole climate process really has a goal, and the first question you ask is, what is the goal? And I was delighted to see that the process now has a work stream for long-term goal. I have to be honest and say I have not looked into what they're saying at this point. We did work into this on the Healthy Climate Project to say, what if we set a goal for the climate, for having a healthy climate. And I don't know, there's not a lot to say other than what it is to invite you as people participating to ask yourself, well, what if the goal was a healthy climate? What if we wanted to get back a healthy climate for our children to live in? And it turns out that we can do that. Then the first thing we need to do is tell the people who are actively making policy that the goal we want them to work for is a healthy climate. Because indeed, the policy that you need for a healthy climate is going to be different than the policy you need for a not very good climate. And the direction we're heading right now is a not very good climate. A lot of people are trying to stabilize the climate, sort of stabilize it into a not very good climate, which may not be what we really want. So our opportunity is to communicate to people, all the people engaged in climate work with the UN, to look at a goal that they really want, could get passionate about, because they're all climate. And that's all I have to say, Joe. Anything else? Can you tell us all about what's in the stream at this point?
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of contextualize a little bit. Why are we working with the Healthy Climate Project on this work stream? The long-term goal is a highly controversial issue in negotiations. Some people think that if we establish this goal, we will save all life on Earth, and if we establish a different goal, we're all dead. And so it gets people very hot under their collar, it gets people into very heated arguments. And a lot of it is rhetorical. And what Peter and the Healthy Climate Project are working on is how people think about the long-term goal. Is it something that where we're striving for actual success? Or is it something where we're striving for something that's somewhere on the way to success, but might include so much chaos that we actually can't keep a lid on things? And so the long-term goal could be 2 degrees Celsius global temperature rise, or 1.5 degree temperature rise, or 350 parts per million, or 280 parts per million, right? It could be full decarbonization by 2050, negative emissions by 2100. Is trying to put all those things in perspective. Those are all stops on the way to success. Right?
Yeah. And so for people listening, the goal that we're talking about is restoring the ice caps. It's something that's meaningful. To do that means that we've ended sea level rise and we've restored normal weather conditions. And that's pretty much what we want for a healthy climate. And that's not something that you necessarily get with any degree of CO2 or decarbonization or any other particular measure. Okay, good.
Thank you. We have now about 15 minutes for an open discussion on all of these work stream subjects. What we're going to try to do is borrow the insights, the questions you're asking on these stickies to try to motivate that conversation, but it's an open discussion. What's on the stickies or what I say. What we're going to try to do is have kind of Q&A for those who have spoken about these different work streams, Q&A in general, and anyone can stand up and say, you know, I have the answer to that. But we want to see if we can actually figure out what it is that we're trying to do in this room on specific areas of affinity. So let's just start out by collecting those questions. Do you have any?
That's two. We got one specifically about oceans, one about CCEN in general.
Why don't we start with CCEN, and then we can go to the oceans one, and Jerome can come back and answer that.
So, why not have the UNFCCC or one other NGO do the reading notes instead of a small organization that will have to fight very hard to be heard amongst the plethora of environmental projects, organizations, NGOs, all vying for the same cause?
So why not have an already established sort of big global NGO or UN agency or something do the read and note thing? Well, the reason is because, well, let's just say, why does Citizens Climate Lobby exist? It exists because there's a massive gap in the way that we make policy about climate, which is that no one is actually sitting down and talking to people who don't want to do it. What people do is they gather somewhere else, call people names, get really upset, get everyone else upset, and there's no one making those connections. So when the founder of CCL, Marshall Saunders, went to big NGOs and said, listen, there's a way to do this. I've worked with an organization that does this for years. It's raised billions of dollars for poverty reduction, hunger relief, and fighting disease around the world through this way of doing citizen engagement. Every single one of them said, we don't do that. That's not our mission. We have no resources for that. And so he said, well, I guess I have to do it. So he started up this organization with 29 people in one local chapter in 2007. And in 2015, there are over 21,000 members that are doing that work now. It takes time, it takes effort, but you know, a number of people have been saying throughout the last year, and I think after the attacks that happened here in Paris, it became even more important insight that what we're trying to do is hard, and that's why we're doing it. And so you ask people to do something that's outside their comfort zone or that's outside their mission, and they say no, you can either just let it go or you can do it. So no one else is doing it, that's why we're doing it. The others can kind of get involved. It's a completely open thing.
How tied in is your work to the work of Rockstone, have you, Stefan, et cetera, planetary boundaries with its balance? Putting something overview, not affecting one area to one elaborate.
Yeah, it's just I'm wondering how you tie in the work of Rockstone and Stefan, the planetary boundaries, because it always strikes me as a really good way of looking at things. So we're not sort of trying to get one area and actually putting other areas into create disbalance or unbalance. And I just thought, you know, that's a really good way to look at it. Because it's got the ocean, you know, acidification in there, but it's got all the other things as well. And it's a developing piece of work. You know?
So the issue of planetary boundaries is one where, you know, there are a lot of ways to address that question. It's a very important concept, and there's a lot of really great work that's been done on it. And some people's approach to the question of planetary boundaries is that we should all stop traveling, we should all stop eating, we should all stop doing things that we have to do to connect to each other as a global society. Other people's approach is we should just do everything intelligently, make sure we live within our limits. That countries should try to have some kind of balance as to how resource intensive every country is per capita. The thing that I think our approach is going towards is there's no one approach to the question of planetary boundaries that's the exact right approach, but what we can do is we can aim for the smartest possible outcome. And the smartest possible outcome would be that we don't overstress the planet. And if the way that we get there is by developing the most efficient technologies, then that's what we should be doing. And if the way that we get there is by being more responsible about our use of resources, that's what we should be doing. When we know that excess emissions of heat-trapping gases ruin the Earth's life support systems, we have to stop doing those things. I think that's our approach. But what we're doing as a network is to try to learn from people's experience. What can they do? What are they doing? And how do we share that information so that others can keep up with the leaders, the ones who are doing it best? I think it's to try to fill in that gap where there needs to be more momentum, more sharing, more insight. And can I add something? Sure.
So what I want to add is that my ER doc analogy again is that this problem of climate change can very easily become overwhelming. And I doubt that there's a person in this room who doesn't feel overwhelmed by this challenge. And therefore, we wish we could call in Superman. Superman is something of our childhood comical fantasies. But there is a Superman still available to us. And that is the power of money. And right now, the money is sick. The money is ill. The money system, which runs everything outside of nature, in the human world, has become corrupt. It's the market failure of the externalization of the damages caused by these artificially cheap fossil fuels. And if we start sending the right money signals to everybody, even people who don't care about climate change or even know that it's happening. They will get that signal because everybody touches money. Almost everybody touches money. If you're a tribe in the jungle in the Amazon, maybe you don't touch money very much, but everybody else does. And so that's the tweak. It's the little engine that could. It's the little tweak in the economy that, like in the climate system, a small forcing over time, that's how climate change used to take place, a small forcing over time has an enormous impact on the climate. And a small tweak in the money system will have an enormous impact in human behavior. And I think that that will go a long way to solving the problem. And it makes the problem much less daunting because we don't have to start talking about giving up the things we want to do. Those things will fall into place as the money gets healthier. That's the concept.
Here are very good questions concerning the oceans. Do we need much higher targets for MPAs, or can we address oceans outside of these two things? MPAs, so MPAs is somebody who knows ocean resources. So yeah, you have the same. So MPA is marine protected area. We have the same in the forest protected area. The concept, if you want to come again from the protected areas on land that was put into use on water. So there are areas that you designate, and when you say inside these areas there is a higher protection than outside. You do that through regulating human activities inside. Typically, it is limiting or banning fishing inside, but it can also be other things, and it can be a mixture of. So, but in theory, in short, it's just an area, and you say there you can do fishing, you can do something else. You can also. That can be also something, yeah. There is, for example, in the Philippines, there is I know because I work there's some small MPAs which are just because nothing else is happening there, but and the locals say no fishing there. That is a very political MPA. So yeah, we need more MPAs. Right now, I think of the whole world, we have less than 2% of the water surface protected, and this is very biased towards certain ecosystems. Obviously, coral reefs more, which is good because coral reefs are very vulnerable because of post-acidification and excess heating can also kill coral reef very fast. But there is a lot of ecosystems which are not protected. For example, deep sea MPAs, there is very little, and we should try to get all of the ecosystems. And then also scientists who really study MPAs, they say, well, if we could decide that we would like to have 30% of the world oceans protected, which is really a lot. Even if you say it's not a 30% complete ban, but regulated inside is still a lot. But in general, politicians are up to. There is, I think, in the SDGs. The SDG guys, was it 10% the goal in the SDGs? There is a very goal. I think it's 10, which is very good already. But that should be very well. This would be very good already. You should just look that it's not just one ecosystem, or not just on one continent, but we partition that well. Look where is the most valuable ecosystem, the most healthy. Maybe goes more than half broken already. And then also let's try to have coastal ecosystems, deep sea, open high seas. This is really very important because after all, even if you don't address directly the climate change to an MPA, you want to always increase the resilience of an ecosystem to climate change. And increasing resilience nowadays, because every ecosystem is affected by human activities, So the best way how to increase resilience is to take away as much as possible these anthropogenic effects, because those are the worst. It's like I heard a coral reef scientist today. I think coral reefs can survive climate change, but not with pollution, overfishing, destructive fishing methods, destructive tourism, runoff from land, or fertilizing, too much fertilizing. So there will be, if somebody does have diabetes, tuberculosis, cancer all at once, you will die if you have that. But if you have just cancer with modern medicine, it probably will survive, and that's the same. So we should also, so these MPAs are very good at taking the way to take away stressors and make nature do its way of being able to grow their own defenses and be strong against.
I have a question about ocean acidification.
Yeah.
The ocean wants to be where? It's about 8.4. Where is it now, and where is it going? When?
I think it's at 8.1 was created this ago, and I think now we're at 8.0, almost 7.9, and it already starts. There is one fishery already which is affected. It's Northeast Pacific oyster fisheries, or it's
Northwest.
Northwest.
Northeast. No, it's coastal California.
It's northwest of coast of Washington.
But the Pacific is the East Pacific
Ocean.
West Coast. Yeah. So we have this, but this will happen more. We still don't know exactly where it is. I saw yesterday a presentation of a group of scientists that does an analysis how it will affect certain organisms, and he also said there's lots of unknown, but it will definitely be there, not just for fishing, but also for many other.
May I make an analogy? Something that I use in my talks. The change in the pH in the ocean that's due very quickly is about 0.4 pH units, or something like that.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, but a little less now, but we're going there.
Your pH is 7.40 right now. If you come to the emergency room with a pH of 7.0, that's 0.4 units more acidic.
You're dead.
You are sick. You need resuscitation, you're going to the intensive care unit because you have been poisoned, you have lost half your blood volume from trauma, you're in diabetic ketoacidosis, you are very, very sick. That is a very sick metabolic acidosis. And we're doing that to the oceans that cover 2/3 of the surface of the planet, and rapidly. And it seems to me that the civilization that knows how to engineer its own DNA, land a school bus on the surface of Mars perfectly, develop a planetary nervous system, part of which I'm holding in my hand, knows better than to cause a metabolic acidosis to the oceans to which we came. That is not the sign of an intelligent civilization. And so part of what we're doing now is to prove whether the kind of intelligence humans possess actually has survival advantage. And the direction we're going is, that question is going to be answered in a minute.
I think the number that I've seen, that's 450 parts per million in the atmosphere, it's over. And again, it depends which part of the ocean. Polar oceans, you've gone more than warmer oceans. That's a relatively number which I've seen quite a bit. And
so this is an IQ test for us.
Very good analogy.
Yeah, very good.
It's an excellent analogy. And so we have, thank you, Joe. We've had a couple of extra questions about carbon pricing in the international context, but we also had a question about gender. Really only have one question right now before we move on to the next thing. So, Fred, do you want to read that question? Yeah.
Do you consider the gender perspective?
Or my job. So I was going to open it up and let people share their thoughts, but I do consider it. I have the privilege.
About the organization.
Yeah. Well, so as an organization, we have the desire for everyone to have the most political empowerment and the most access as possible to have any determination as to who that would be. So we do definitely, in terms of the impact on that come from climate or from political decision making that may be different because of the gender of people impacted. It's also something I'm very sensitive to, and think that people should be able to express that experience and not be kind of ignored under the assumption that all things are equal and everybody is equal. But what I was going to say was that there are two things that I've experienced that say to me that everyone everywhere should be a lot smarter about it. One is that I used to teach humanities, and I was able to teach Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindicating the Rights of Woman, where she makes a very particular argument, which is that in 18th century Britain, which is a very talkative and open society at its time, it was still an aristocratic society where women did not have full legal rights in almost every way that we now have started to take for granted in open democracies. And the argument she made was that because of that inequality, the whole society was in prison. Everyone, the most powerful people were living within this tremendous amount of limitation where everything was a charade. Because it was the charade that everybody is protected, that everybody is empowered, that everybody has dignity. When in fact, everybody is being treated as if they don't deserve to live in a world where people are equal, which is a better world. And so she kind of calls on the societies of the world, more or less democratic, regardless, to advance that kind of equal treatment. And education is one of the main priorities. And what we find often in this climate discussion is that education is a huge deficit. And in many parts of the world where conflict arises, or where there are very severe gender imbalances, where people are actually experiencing real day-to-day, hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute persecution based on nothing other than their gender. One of the reasons for that is that there is not enough education in general. There's not enough underlying education for the whole society to empower people to make that better. So that's exactly what we're trying to correct. The other experience I've had that I want to just specifically say is that when we first announced the governance strategy for the Citizens Climate Engagement Network, it was in the Minneapolis 2015 conference on October 25th and 26th. And what was so special to me about that was that, except for me and one other person, the core planning team were all women. And they were all very, very strong women who know exactly what they need to do at the right time to create this good outcome. And the reason I thought that was interesting was that we were talking about these kind of issues of inclusion, issues of access. And what happened there was a very open discussion where people were able to share views from many different perspectives. And for me, it was just a privilege to be in that environment. So I think that's something that we're always thinking about. We have in the agenda 5 minutes for a moderated discussion among the room about what are the things we're focusing on here today. So what are some of the subjects that have come up as key points that we in this room are focusing on? And I don't think 5 minutes is enough time, but we actually don't quite have 5 minutes either because we're over. But maybe could people just kind of stand up and say, just as quickly as possible, 1 word, 2 words, the theme that they think is really standing out for them. And we'll get a few of those and just document them. So anyone, something that you think is really a focus of today on your mind?
People participating for what, get what we want.
Okay, participating for what we want. Yeah. Fair participation. Okay.
Global expansion.
Global expansion. Expansion of
The network.
Okay.
The web of concerned and frantic people.
Global expansion of the web of concerned and frantic. So ecological agriculture.
Okay.
So ecological agriculture, ecologically sound agriculture.
Access to affinity.
Access through affinity. I like
using money to turn the left.
Using money to turn the lever. Is that also making money to do it?
Yeah, but it's more like using the economy to incentivize, just to kind of nudge people to do the right thing and not do the wrong thing, if they don't even know.
Is that the same as maybe I was thinking of the finance that you talked about? Is that the same?
I think alternative financing is fine, just in case. And then, so let's take one more.
Listening more closely.
All right, so while Claire's writing, listening more closely, I'm going to read off what's there. And when I finish reading, I just want to see from maybe a raising his hand, who thinks this is a good list. Participating for what we want, fair participation, global expansion of the web of concerns and frantic people, ecologically sound agriculture, access through affinity, using money to turn the levers, using economic incentives, alternative financing mechanisms, and listening more closely. Does that sound like a good representation of what we've been talking about today?
Ocean health.
Ocean health, okay. Ocean's got a lot of time, so that's good.
Building relationships.
Okay, so if we like this list as it is, everything I read plus ocean health and building relationships, let's just applaud. If not, if the room is silent, then we will spend the next 2 hours there. So thank you for indulging me all this time. I want to say a couple of things about some of the people who are signing up to support this. Someone who's not here today because he's actually doing another event in Thailand is Miroslav Polzer, Secretary General of IAAI, the International Association for the Advancement of Innovative Approaches to Global Challenges, and the founder of the Global Challenges Foundation. And Miroslav's thinking about what people like us can do is that when you see that the global system is not quite working like a well-oiled machine, not helping people as much as it could, or there are a lot of political complications, instead of saying that's horrible, the apocalypse is coming, we can say that's an opportunity. There's a gap, and we can fill in that gap. We can step into that space that no one is occupying and do that work. And what we can do is we can build organizations and collaborations that are essentially an auxiliary engine to the UN system. By working together and by getting those things right together, we can actually make the whole thing move faster and in a healthier way for people. So I also wanted to share some insights that came from a meeting that was held at the UN headquarters a few months ago on the May 2016 UN Environment Assembly. The UN Environment Assembly is the only other universal assembly of the 193 member states of the United Nations. We're all required to participate in order to make policy on a specific agenda. For instance, the UN General Assembly. The UN Environment Assembly is the overseeing body for the UN Environment Program, the implementation of the UN system's environment. This is going to be the second global assembly. Before it was a smaller group of countries. And what the UN Environment Assembly President and the Deputy Director of the UN Environment Program want 2016 to be about is the biggest expansion of direct citizen engagement in a global negotiation ever. Not NGOs telling people this is our best advice based on our research, but actual people all over the world informing the countries that are gathered in Nairobi in May what they want and participating actively in the policy discussion and decision making. So that's one of the reasons that we're working with the MyUNEA platform, myUNA.org, to try to build in their strategy management. This is now starting to be seen as something that the world needs, that the world's leaders need. I wanted to share that. And one final thing, when we first announced the governance strategy for this network in Minneapolis, we had a very special letter sent from the Vatican. Cardinal Turkson, who was one of the advisors to Pope Francis in writing of his encyclical Laudato Si, caring for our common home, was invited but was unable to attend. He sent a letter and said that for this effort to build this new kind of strategy, he sent his prayerful best wish for success in this endeavor. And so this is something that has the support and the recognition of some very serious people who are really doing work to try to make the world better. We have a few minutes now for some poetry. And I think it's important to put into context why we would do that in this space. And I think that the three poets are going to speak for themselves, and that their verse will probably give you a sense of why we're doing it. But I want to say something myself about it. I'm a poet. I write poetry, I publish poetry. And it's something that I understand is integral to everything else we do. So some people know that, you know, I have a blog, Poet Economist. What's the connection there? And for me, the connection is that if you do economics in a way where you just look at narrow formulas that exclude a lot of what has value, you might gain insight into one or two things. You might gain insight into 5 or 6. But you're going to lose insight into so many things that there really starts to be an ethical question as to what you're doing. You have to be able to assess what has value, even if you don't know how to count it, even if it doesn't have a dollar value or a value in euros. Poetry is something that allows us to say what you value. Poetry is something that allows us to get into an abstract conceptual space and to think about how we feel about things. And you can do things in that kind of language that tell you what is sacred to you, and that tell others how your vision of the world is full of the sacred. And I think that you can't really do this kind of work unless you have something of that in you. Imagine that we all have that. So that's why we've invited poets to come and tell their story. And I'm going to ask, in the order that you've chosen, I've asked you to come up and say something about yourselves, and then share your experience, and just try to give us a sense of what this is all about in your perspective.
Good afternoon, Planet Please family. How's everyone doing?
Hey,
are we awake? Yeah. We're still excited. We're still talking. We're still engaging in dialogue. Yeah?
Yeah.
So another thing about poetry is spoken word is that it's a very give-and-take type of relationship. When I'm up here, I'm not just sitting at home to you. We are in a conversation. You hear me? Yeah, cool. My name is Teresa Sianatonu. I come from, my family and I come from the island of Samoa. My way is San Francisco. That's where I was born. And so I'm really appreciative to have been here for the whole event, because this is my first talk, and I'm learning a lot of big words, and I'm learning a lot about the data and the numbers that are out there and whatnot. And I'm still honestly struggling with how to make connections to what this all means for me in the context of how I understand climate change. Because I know when I try to talk about climate change with my family and whatnot, they laugh, because they're like, I can't prioritize that right now, because we're working class, because we're marginalized, because I'm queer, because I'm a woman, because I have so many other things that are priorities right now for my survival. And yet I still come from a place that will sink in my lifetime. And so I wrote a poem about the struggle, the constant tightrope that I'm on, of knowing I have to talk about climate change, knowing I have to care, but also fighting all these other aspects of oppression, right? And so I look around this room, and my hope is that this room grows in terms of gender, in terms of people of color, in terms of young people's voices and whatnot throughout the coming years, and even over the course of these next 2 weeks. But I'm appreciative that me and my sisters are here to represent on behalf of Global Call for Climate Action, and on behalf of a contest that we won that brought us here to Paris, called Spoken Word for the World. So here's my poem. I don't know much about how to talk about climate change, but I do know a thing or two about water. I know that San Francisco, city of my birth, is running out of it. As the state of California is losing its memory of what lakes look like, because not enough rain has fallen to replenish them. I know that my island of Samoa is thriving off the very thing that plans to kill it once the sea levels are too high to distinguish the difference between swimming and drowning. I know that the hurricane spared my grandpa and his home back in September of 2009, but took 200 others. How no one in my family ever dared to call this a blessing. I don't know much about how to talk about the impacts of fossil fuels or carbon footprints, but I do know a lot about poverty and the paradoxes of being poor. Where saving the environment never means saving people who come from environments like mine, where Black and brown bodies are riddled with despair, too worried about going broke, to even worried about going green, losing their will to fight the foreclosure sites sprouting on their lots like redwoods, worrying about how to make a dollar stretch with dignity, to even worry about saving anything but themselves, and I can't blame them. According to a recent poll, most Americans know that the climate is changing, but they say they're just not that worried about it. They say that it's too distant for them to care about it right now, too abstract, too big, too rich to care about it affecting them, too poor to prioritize caring about how it affects them. Climate change is not always something that I feel confident talking about, but I know what it's like to watch Mother Nature, watch other mothers grieving in the streets as their child's Black body decomposes on hot ground, at the feet of police brutality, in the face of an iPhone camera. Watch the rest of the world watch our extinction go viral. Another version of an inconvenient truth. Call this a debate if you want. Call this a liberal left-wing protest cry all you want, but this is what I know about climate change. I know the academics who take my community's pain and turn it into a grant proposal without our permission. The reporters who take my community's grief and use it as a fear tactic. I know the price of grief and the people who have to pay for it a third world away. I know how to trace the puppet strings back to the corporations who hold the world's wealth for hostage in their back pockets while the rest of us spend our lives paying for the gun. I know what it's like to come from the most powerful country on the planet, forever pregnant off of its own power. There are those who want to talk about climate change, yet don't want to talk about how those who are affected the most can't prioritize it in the first place. Because prioritizing would mean being forced to pull the layers back and also talk about the poverty, the racism, the injustice, the privilege, the hush money, the hit list that climate change is operating from, the rounds it's making on Earth, starting with the most vulnerable. Addressing climate change means admitting that it starts and ends with us, but for some reason, none of us can seem to figure out where we put the mirror. Everyone is affected by climate change, yet some are affected first, but no one cares until it's affecting them. This is for those of us who may not have the language, but who still have a voice. This is for those of us who can't afford rent, but who also can't afford to wait. Those of us who are ready to act, even if it means doing it for someone you won't even know, in a place on the other side of the world you didn't even know existed. There are those of us who are talking about climate change, and then there are those of us who are fighting it. This is for those of us who have always had to figure out a way to do both.
Thank you so much, my sister Teresa, for speaking out. I think it's incredibly important and urgent for our voices to be part of this conversation. We represent communities from Australia, Samoa, the Philippines, and Guam, these island nations that bear the brunt of the devastating effects of climate change. And it's incredibly important for us to be able to take our stories here and for them not to be barred from the negotiations the way they are, but to be able to be part of events like this and have people like you who influence policies and who are also very influential in what you can put out to the world. So this is our contribution. Perhaps the further you are, the smaller we become. In this spectacle of drowning, as you watch baby feet
float to shore after the ocean spits out another hometown. You can pretend we aren't here, like you pretend this earth will feed us for as long as soil cracks beneath your machinery. Our pulses know the rhythm of emergencies, just like our islands know the Pacific salt that cradles them. There was a time it could preserve us. 2 years ago, the number of people displaced by natural disasters tripled the number of war refugees. How can you see sky and not admit decay? This world is in a race to turn away from the ruins, whether family history or a whole country shatters against the tide. Whether we keep our lives but lose our homes, we lose. And how many times has home become collateral damage for a business deal? When the smoke rises to a bankrupt sky, tell me this fight for us doesn't end where the borders begin. Perhaps our hunger cannot look the same. When yours demands that the ocean swallow itself to be filled, and we are hungry for justice. Now my hometown is still drying its feet as more poison bleeds overhead. They say it is sacrifice so we can live in comfort. But what shelter is there in disease? These anthems of rebuilding, blooming from our chests, were made to heal. Collect the stones from your mouth. There is no grace in sin. Let us not gorge our pockets with false promises to stop nations from drowning, to protect our people's food grown from the land so no child's stomach will swell with the ocean. Again, let us not say there is nothing we could have done, but this be the beginning of us rising.
Hello everyone, my name is Isabella. I'm from Oakland, California. My family comes from the Philippines, from Tanawa, Leyte. In November 2013, Super Typhoon Haiyan hit my mother's hometown, where my mom and my entire mother's side of the family live. For about a week, I had no idea if my family was alive or not. All I could see was the news reports that told me that everything in our town of Tanawa was gone, everything was flat. And I remembered going to my auntie's house and looking at the news reports and trying to find our home, my family's home, in the news reports, and not being able to recognize anything from my mother's hometown. So I eventually quit my job, looking to look for my family. I was thankful that my mom was alive, but I did lose many members of my family. And I just want to say these things because a lot of times when we talk about climate change, we talk about future generations. It's very true, but it's also easy for us to forget that there are people. In this last year, I've lost more than 10 members of my family to natural disasters that hit the Philippines. It's important to remember that there are faces on the front line right now, and I'm very thankful to be here to be telling those stories, but it's also very hard for us to tell stories that remind us of our mothers, that remind us of our homelands when we're so far away, and when it feels so often like our words aren't doing anything. But we have to remember that we are doing something, speaking for the communities that aren't present, that don't have the privilege to come to Paris and to speak to you all. They don't have the privilege to come into these conference rooms where no one really looks like us, or no one really comes from our homelands. Maybe we're talking about island nations and oceans, but we don't really see our families. As my sister was saying, we don't really see our families here. So it's important for us to share this. So I ask that we all reciprocate this energy right now, because it takes a lot for us to bring this out. I wonder if my mother can still see the bodies when she stares into sleep. November 8, 2013, Super Typhoon Yolanda was the strongest storm to ever make landfall in the recorded history of the world. My mama tells nightmares of how ocean swallowed her town whole. Foam water rammed into the house, snapped off metal locks, and flooded the doors open. It's like the winds were searching for me there. When I arrived in Tanawan 1 month after the typhoon,
I do not recognize my mother's home. Roofs crumpled like bald paper. The basketball court where I spent each childhood morning is now an unmarked mass grave. 13 holes for over 600 bodies. My homeland is a country of islands counting down the years before we are drowning in a rising. When I return to the U.S., politicians label climate change a myth, deny our existence as if natural disasters only count when there are white bodies to bury. Each year, an average of 20 typhoons hit the Philippines, and my teacher tells me God is punishing us. How else can you explain storm surge waves taller than coconut trees, 5 corpses stuffed into one body bag, names of entire families scribbled onto debris-made crosses at the traffic circle turned mass grave? We people, born from ocean, now fear the sea that stole our family. This is not the problem of the Philippines, of the Pacific Islands, of Oceania, long after the news reports. When the next super typhoon has blown away my family's relief tent, we will still be standing in sea salt flooded rice fields, brown fisher folk demanding, do not turn away from the disasters yet to come. Our islands are in your hands. These spirits sing a warning. Andagat gutom lagihan. The sea that feeds us will one day grow hungry again.
That says it all. So I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank each of you for bringing that into this. I think that's what this is all about. That's what this work is about, and we need to hear each other. I want to quote one more person who, you know, some of you are probably getting tired of me saying this, but person who's the love of my life gave a very powerful speech about freedom. She's the executive director of the Nobel Peace Prize Fund and was asked to speak in the context of the violence and chaos in the world about this subject of human freedom. And she said something during this talk that I think really hit people hard. She told a story about a conflict zone where she had done work and the situations people were facing there. And she said, are we free if violence forces us into violence? I think that when we think about this issue, when we think about whose business is it too hard to do, is it something that I should spend time on? We're thinking about our own personal freedom. What we're not thinking about is, are we actually strong enough? Are we creative enough? Are we tuned in enough to each other to actually be free? And I think that's what this is ultimately all about, is we're trying to connect with each other so that we can be collaborative enough and creative enough and tuned in enough to actually have that strength and resist the temptation to be divided, to be against each other, to be violent, when we would just all be smarter together. So I want to thank everybody. It's been a great experience being with you. The Citizens Climate Engagement Network is now officially launched. It exists. And let's just give each other a round of applause and come up for a big family photo.